The literacy theory that I chose to do my lesson based around was chapter 2 in Do I Really Have to Teach About Reading, which is the so what of reading comprehension. So what really stood out to me was the double entry diary form, and it says right here on page 12 that I created a double entry diary as a comprehension aid that would give students a place to hold their thinking and possibly force them to go deeper into the text. And the motivation behind the double entry diary was that students were kind of struggling to make a connection with the text. And I think a lot of times, especially in English classes, that students struggle to make a connection with the text, and that's what's most important about the majority of the text that you're reading for students to comprehend in an English classroom. So I based my lesson around the double entry diary. So to begin the lesson, I would ask my students what their definition of imagery would be. So imagery is an important part of the English language, and it's an important literary device at that. So I would open up the floor, and this would kind of get their mind going on, what imagery is. And I would open up the floor. Everyone could have, their say in what they think imagery is. And then after we had a class discussion about it, I would pass out a sheet of paper. And I would have each person individually write what they think imagery is, whether it's what they see when they read a book, or, what they see when they read a poem, and things like that. So, okay, so my CSO that I chose for the lesson is for students to cite and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of what the literary text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text, including determining where the text leaves matters uncertain. Okay, so I chose the poem The Storm in the Black Forest by David Herbert Lawrence. So I attached a copy in the video, and here is the copy that I would pass out to my students. And I made my own rather than printing out what I found on a website, because at the bottom I actually put words to know, and as you can see right here, so these will be words that some students might not be familiar with, so I defined them. And so that way when we're reading along and we get to those words in the poem, they can kind of look down as that for a reference. It's important for students to be familiar with all of the words in the poem, especially when talking about imagery, because students need to be able to make that connection with the text, and if they are unsure about words and what they mean, they are not going to be able to connect to the text the way that I would want them to. So, this is where the double entry diary comes into play. After we would read the poem together as a class, and a lot of times students are not visual learners, they need to hear it. So I would not only have students, have this sheet in front of them with the poem on it, but they would also, we would read it together. So sometimes hearing a poem out loud, especially in poetry, really contributes to the meaning of the work. So my double entry diary would be set up like this, and I broke up the poem with each individual line. And as you can see, the other entry would be the description and their own illustration. So as far as description, they would read in the double entry chart, or we would do it together depending on, how advanced readers I have in my class. If I think they're capable and they would be better off reading and doing the double entry diary by themselves, I would do so. But if I have a class that's, not as advanced in reading and poetry, we would do it together. So, just for example, the first line says, "Now it is almost night from the bronzy soft sky." Well, bronzy is one of the words that I have already defined on their other sheet with the full poem put together. And so I would go over with the students, bronzy is the color of bronze. So they would add in this entry right here for the description, I would have them describe what they see. this helps because, students are looking at each line individually and they have to describe what the poem is making them see. So not only are they, having to look deep into the text, but they're having to form their own description and their own words based off of the words that they're reading in the poem. So then underneath, I just gave them enough room to do just a small illustration, and I would have coloring utensils and colored pencils and things like that. So I would have them draw what they just described. So I would also, as the students were working through this and we were kind of talking as a group and things like that, I would ask them, just to tie it all together, what words to go back through and underline in the line portion, what words motivated them to draw, whether it was the word bronzy or if it was the term white liquid fire. So as they were going through and picking out these words that, gave them that good imagery and that helped them do the illustration and develop their own description of the line, it would draw attention to the importance of the details and of the words that are causing them to get these descriptions, which is the imagery that the author has included. So going back through and picking each individual word that gave them that, mental image of what they're drawing contributes to the imagery. So, yes. Then at the end of my lesson, I would have students go back to that sheet of paper that I first had them do for the anticipatory set, and I would have them write down their own definition of imagery. And so after we've gone through a whole lesson and we've really, picked apart a poem and its imagery and appreciated the descriptive words the author uses, I would have them go back and write a very detailed description of their own definition of imagery. There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, it's just whatever they think. And so not only would this, when they turned it in at the end of the class, this would not only kind of give me insight into, how well they did with the lesson, but it would also kind of, I learned from them too based off of their definitions of imagery, because, each student is picturing something different from the text that they're doing, and each illustration is going to be different. So that helps me as a teacher as well. I would also have them turn in their double entry diary to me once they finished, and it's kind of long. It's a long poem, so if we didn't, have enough time in class to do it, I would have them take it home and finish it for homework. But at the end of the lesson, and once they're finished with their double entry diary, I would have them turn it into me. And this wouldn't be something that I would necessarily grade. It's kind of hard to grade students based off of their, artistic abilities. I personally wouldn't be able to draw anything great, but at least it would give me an idea of how well they're doing with the lesson, and if they're understanding imagery, and if they're really being able to take and make their own description from each line of the poem and make that into their own illustration. And that kind of gives me an idea of how well they do with poetry and how well they'll do with other works in the class. So this will help me, once like I said, evaluate how they're doing with poetry. And this would kind of help me as well see what I need to focus on, if I need to spend more time on imagery, and maybe do another double entry diary on a poem with less assistance. So maybe I could pick a harder poem. They could define their own words rather than me having the words right here defined at the bottom of the page, and maybe that would help them, and things like that. Just making the lesson more advanced. I could dial it back if that was something that I noticed that the students were struggling with. Maybe I could kind of go over it with them, and I could do a line myself and see, I'll pick a line out of the poem. For example, jugful after jugful of pure white liquid fire, bright white. So, maybe they could use me as an example, and I would kind of write my own description of what I think it means on the board. And then I would draw a picture of, what I see. And so that way they can kind of see, what direction they should be going in with the activity. So but all in all, the point of this lesson is to show the importance of imagery and how it contributes to the overall meaning of the work. And this activity not only allows students to look at the poem line by line, but it really allows them to engage deeply with the poem and with the text. And that's what, I got from chapter 2, the so what of reading comprehension, is, when you allow students to, engage so deeply in the text, you kind of see what they're personally pulling for it, as far as like the double entry diary in this activity. And like I said earlier, I think that's really important in an English classroom, is to kind of see what your students are getting from the text. And they might be getting something different than another student, or maybe getting something different from you, and that's the whole point of the English language. So definitely